Hey everybody, my name's DJ Wooldridge.
And I'm Ken Whiting.
Horror films weren't my thing for the longest time, but over the past year or so, Ken has been exposing me to more and more horror films.
I opened up the hearse and I said, you get in this.
Yep.
We're going through the cemetery.
And it's been an enjoyable ride so far, so we thought we'd include you guys on my journey. So Ken, tell me about your history with horror.
Horror's always been really close to my heart. The discussion of death can be both funny and terrifying. And I think it's an important conversation to be had. So horror has always been kind of the polarity of me. What I like when I like to be funny and when I like to be serious, and it somehow balances my world.
As for me, I had a kind of traumatizing experience with a horror movie when I was a kid. Me and my dad used to watch Doctor Who late at night some nights, and then one night when my parents were asleep and I was still up, I thought, hey, why not watch some Doctor Who? But when I turned on the TV, Doctor Who wasn't on. Later, I found out the movie was Phantasm, and it was one of the gorier scenes, and that traumatized me as a child.
Yeah, Phantasm is like a slice of cheesecake in the horror world. Just a real nice, easy transition. And it terrified you.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
And we got to watch them. We got to deal with the psychosis
my
of
trauma.
what you were traumatized by.
To be fair, there's a wide gulf between expecting Doctor Who and Phantasm.
Oh, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. You saw the sphere plow through someone's chest.
Yeah, it was rough.
You did not know
but
what was going on.
We have plenty of time to talk about Don Coscarelli and Phantasm. Tonight, what we're talking about is Return of the Living Dead. Ba, ba, ba! Before we get any further, we're going to spoil the hell out of all the movies we're talking about. So if you haven't seen The Return of the Living Dead, remedy that immediately. I gotta tell you, Ken, probably one of my favorite zombie movies I've ever seen.
You know, on the topic of zombie movies, let's just cut into that right away.
Yeah.
Zombie movies are typically not high art in the horror world.
Not anymore. They started off pretty high echelon.
Zombie movies were a really cool idea at first, but then instead of having an individual monster like a vampire or a werewolf, you just had these things. It doesn't expose the character the way some of the other monsters do.
So you're saying they're kind of generic because there's a bunch of them and they all fit in a thing. For me, I think what really separated Return of the Living Dead is I've been watching Walking Dead, and there's been a lot of zombie stuff recently, and especially with Walking Dead, it's all unrelentingly dour. Like, it's just a huge downer. And part of the fun of horror movies is the fun, and Return of the Living Dead has that in spades.
Let's talk about Return of the Living Dead and where it comes from. Talk about the white zombie flick. Classic horror zombie movie.
And really where America's fascination with zombies the seeds were planted.
Yeah, because, it was a voodoo idea about shamans awakening the dead that had recently deceased, and they would come back to life and become slaves for these people. Yeah. And then we turned it into white zombies killer. Night of the Living Dead, though, really kind of changes the world of zombies. It really just, it punches you in the face. And I think a lot of that is owed to George Romero and John Russo.
Yeah. And
now here, the two have creatively fought for their rights. John Russo's gotten the Living Dead title. George Romero's going to stick with Of the Dead. Yeah. And here's our first sequel spinoff, Return of the Living Dead.
Yeah, and it's funny because John Russo had his vision. He wanted to make his own movie, and then Tobe Hooper from
Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, was supposed to direct it. He had to bail out, and so they brought in this Dan O'Bannon guy to rewrite the script, and eventually he directed it, and he directed it under the terms that he could make it whatever he wanted.
Dan O'Bannon, clearly high caliber. He's one of the main writers for Alien.
Exactly.
Of course you're going to let him rewrite the story.
But it's funny because John Russo just can't seem to catch a break telling his version of Living Dead. But guess what? We got two great movies out of the CT planet.
Yes.
Living Dead is characterized as a horror comedy, but I think it might be more accurate to characterize it as a horror punk film.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what horror punk was about this time in this era in the 80s. Horror punk was this weird gap between hardcore crust punks and rockabillys. Yeah. And you had these guys from the South that were playing stand-up basses, and then you had these guys from the West Coast that were just playing loud music. Yeah. And it's horror punk was the middle ground where it's let's worship Glenn Danzig and the Misfits, and let's give nothing but praise to Lux Interior for the Cramps. Speaking of, the Cramps song in Return of the Living Dead is just so perfect. That's why I have to say it's absolutely a horror punk.
Yeah. And the other thing that really struck me about is the absolute irreverence for everything.
Yeah.
It's less about telling jokes and more just not taking anything seriously. I mean, even the requisite female nudity, none of the characters treat it like it's a big deal. Clearly trash the chick that just strips down partway through the movie. She's done it before. Nobody gives a crap. And then when the rain starts falling down, everybody's like, well, I mean, it's your fault. You're naked. You stripped down. Like, whatever. Nobody cares. I think the performance of the movie, just for sheer audacity, has to go to Linnea Quigley for just being willing to be nude for a majority of the film.
Balls out.
Yeah.
Well, in this case, tits out.
Yeah, exactly. And when you're dealing with the zombies, there's not this overwhelming sense of seriousness. I mean, they're a threat. In fact, the zombies in this are more of a threat than they are in most other movies.
Yeah.
Like in most movies that try and take it seriously, like you just cut off the head, you're done. The zombies in this...
Got it. Something to the brain.
Something to the brain, and they're out. But in this movie, you can dismember them. If you burn them, the ashes will create rain, create more of them. It's like...
Acid
totally
zombie rain. The Living Dead series, there's different types of zombies. Hands down, if we have an award to give to the coolest zombie, it's going to Tarman.
It's got to be Tarman. Tarman is the king zombie. The zombies in this movie are kind of unique in that they still have motor skills and can think. So when you see Tarman, for one, brains, and then he starts using tools to try and get at people, like, that's legitimately scary. Like, this zombie's just not just some shuffler. Like, he's smart.
His body is muscle melted to his bone.
Yeah.
And it's like, you've got that type of zombie. But then you have the more recently converted. They have a higher level of intellectual capacity. They're, setting up road traps where they're dressed like a cop, waving cars down, and then a herd of zombies attacks it, and they get in and they say, "Send more cops."
Exactly, they go to the radio. Speaking of which, they talk about in the movie the reason the zombies have an obsession with brains, it helps them deal with the fact that they're in pain all the time.
It's an escape.
Yeah, it's like drugs.
And in a scene that first off, I know you absolutely love the animatronics on.
Oh, yeah.
But here's this torso of a female zombie, and the head's going back and forth like... And like the little spine bone is just tingling.
And it's just this little bit of wetness, like it's leaking a little bit of some grossness.
Probably anal juice.
Probably.
She goes back and forth explaining why they eat brains, why they're feeling death destroy their body, and brains are the only solace.
Well, and especially as you got the two guys that worked in the shop that kind of caused this whole thing. You see the rigor mortis on their bodies.
They're feeling death erode them.
Ugh, it's so gross. But let's go back to the animatronics real quick. In that, like, I'm a huge proponent of practical effects. Because it's a real thing that light can really bounce off. Practical effects in this, from half a zombie on the table to Tarman to the zombies clawing up, like miniatures, practical effects, they're so rad.
So good.
So for you, as the horror expert, where does Return of the Living Dead fall into the horror spectrum, and maybe more specifically the zombie world?
I think it's like an 8 out of 10 in horror flicks, right? It's really high up there. It does a lot of really rad things. Personally, it speaks to me in a really cool level because I love both horror and punk, and seeing them together in such a parodied and beautiful way is fun. But as a zombie movie, it reminds us, like, not everything has to be so serious. Sometimes we can just sit back and enjoy the creation of these monsters.
So that's all I have for Return of the Living Dead.
Yeah, we sewed that body up. Bones in the bag on that one. Yeah, I guess you could say we skinned the cat on that one.
And for those of you who don't know, Ken and I have actually made a horror short film.
What?
Not only that, it stars Joe Beretta from SourceFed.
What?
And Harley Morenstein from Epic Mealtime.
What?
So hit this link here.
Is that where I can watch it?
It's absolutely where you can watch it. Not only that, you hit the like button. This film's actually in a competition to be in a feature film anthology called The ABCs of Death.
Part 2.
You can actually check out the first one on Netflix. There's a different horror short for each letter of the alphabet, and they opened up the letter M for competition, which is what our short film...
M is for misotheism.
...is entered in. And the more likes we have, the better chance we have to actually be in the film. So if you want to see Joe Beretta and Harley Morenstein in a feature film, go to this link, hit the like button, and make that happen for us.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you guys for watching. My name's DJ Woldridge.
And I'm Ken Whiting. Thanks for coming to the crematorium.